All right, everyone. I am so sorry. This is my third time recording this. So let's just hope that Zoom cooperates with me. I tried it on Loom, tried it on Canva. Let's hope Zoom, third time's a charm. So, hi everyone. This is my presentation on queerness and television. I'll be specifically focusing on The Nanny and The Sopranos. I do want to give two warnings, one being a spoiler warning. I know that these shows have been out for like 20 plus years now, but you know, just in case you feel inspired to binge after this, please be aware that I do give some spoilers because it's kind of impossible to do this presentation without spoilers. And then my second warning is just a trigger warning, especially when we go to the Sopranos. There are slurs and very vulgar language and things like nudity in a lot of the scenes that I have, just because of the nature of the show. It's a mafia show, very male gazy show. So just like you're warned. Also, I promised Shill that this presentation would be 20 minutes. I don't know about that anymore, but let's hope for 20. All right, so just to start, let's start off with The Nanny, if it wants to load. Hello. Okay, there we go. So, The Nanny ran from 1993 to 1999. It had 6 seasons on CBS, so it was on network television. It was created by Fran Drescher and her ex-husband, Peter Mark Jacobson. You'll see why making that distinction is important later on in the presentation. So, basically, the show is about Fran Fine, who is a Jewish girl from Flushing. She is fired by her boyfriend. She used to work in a bridal shop. The theme song says literally everything. I could recite it to you right now. She was working in a bridal shop in Flushing, Queens, till her boyfriend kicked her out in one of those crushing scenes. What was she to do? Where was she to go? She was out on her fanny. So basically, she gets fired, right? And then she starts selling cosmetics like Avon, Mary Kay, that kind of thing. And she goes door to door and she finds the Sheffield home. And Mr. Sheffield is a single dad with 3 kids and he is looking for a nanny. Niles, the butler, mistakes Fran for like an applicant on the job and he invites her in to interview and everything. And somehow Miss Fine gets the job even though she wrote her resume in lipstick. So this is a very funny show, very popular show, which has allowed it to have guest stars like Pamela Anderson, Ray Charles, Elizabeth Taylor, Billy Ray Cyrus, Donald Trump, and more. I'm hoping you at least know who Donald Trump is if you don't know who anyone else is. So this is a very queer show, even though it doesn't sound like that when I gave you the description. In fact, I tried to count how many episodes made a nod to queerness, and I genuinely lost track. And this show is the reason why I wanted to do this presentation. The show literally just gave me the presentation because there's so many just queer storylines and queer jokes and things like that. So I literally took out my notes app as I was watching the show and I would just write down all the episodes, but I genuinely stopped doing it because it was so many episodes. It's basically every single episode. So of Queerness in the Nanny, I made the distinction that I noticed them because you might notice something that I have not noticed, or someone else may notice something that no one else has noticed. So please keep that in mind. So obviously, like, how can I talk about the nanny and not talk about her outfits, right? Extremely iconic. People like she like resurfaces in social media every 5 to 10 years, and people just fall in love with her all over again, and I'm all for it. Very over the top outfits, and certainly not appropriate for someone who's a nanny, right? Lots of mini skirts, skin tight outfits, big feathers, big hair, a lot of makeup. There's a lot of jokes on the show, how she dresses like a sex worker or a slut, and she's like very proud of it. And it's just a running joke throughout the show. And to match with her over the top outfits, she has a very over the top personality. A lot of critics and a lot of big film and TV people say that she's the Jewish version of Lucille Ball. And if you don't know who Lucille Ball is, which oh my God, I hope you do, please look up I Love Lucy. But basically, the gist of it is that there's a lot of exaggerated facial expressions, dramatic, and very loud. There's a lot of jokes in the show where it's like when she laughs, the whole neighborhood hears it, and this is kind of like this kind of adds to the whole fish out of water dynamic that she has in the Sheffield home because she's a very working class girl, and then she comes to this like elite very rich, very bougie household. So she has to learn how to be like very demure and quiet and all that, but she's very much not that. Um, so yeah, she's also very stereotypically hyper feminine. She loves shopping, she loves clothes, she loves makeup, loves hair. She's like a little ditzy, very like stereotypical feminine, very dramatic, jumps to conclusions, that kind of thing. And speaking of very dramatic, this is my favorite character. Niles the butler, even though he is a man, he is very like presented as stereotypically feminine as well. He loves to cook and clean. He takes a lot of pride in his very like bougie meals and dishes. He's a big gossip. He's constantly listening in on the intercom. He's sneaking into Mr. Sheffield's office, trying to see what he's talking about. He has very iconic, snarky remarks to Miss Babcock, who is Mr. Sheffield's assistant, and they have like a whole enemies thing going on there. And then I wrote literally invented the sassy man trope because he is him. He is the blueprint for every sassy man that came after him. So that video I have there is just a compilation of all his one-liners and his remarks, not entirely relevant to the presentation, but if you want a good laugh, definitely watch it. And then there's an episode, there is an episode where Fran Fine has a cousin Ira who is a drag artist and Cher impersonator. So basically, the story is Mr. Sheffield is a very well connected Broadway producer, so he knows all these big celebrities. Cher is in the Sheffield home recovering from a surgery, and she doesn't want the press to find out. So the press comes to the Sheffield home looking for Cher, and Fran has the brilliant idea of telling her cousin Ira to perform and pretend that he is Cher when he very much does not look like Cher, but he gives the performance of a freaking lifetime. And if you say that he did not eat, it's homophobic. So watch that video and like have a moment, feel the fantasy for a bit. Another episode, Fran and Val are co-parents. Val is Fran's bestie for life. They are high school best friends. They grew up in Flushing together, and they sponsor I believe she's like from Asia. They sponsor this girl from Asia. She's an orphan. They send her money. They write her letters, and they've been doing this since high school. So finally, May comes to go meet her parents, and there's like this whole thing where Fran and Val are like, oh my God, our little girl has grown up. Oh my God, we had her so young. Very just like very same-sex parent coded. And it really does like there's a point in the episode where they fight and they're like, oh, let's not let the kids break us up again. I love you so much. So just very much, you know. So here are some other examples. Fran Fine becomes best friends with a man who she thinks is gay, but then he turns out to be straight. Fran turns down Mr. Sheffield's lesbian publicist. Uh, Fran dresses as a man to sneak into Mr. Sheffield's meetings. She is also a chismosa or a gossip like Niles. Theater industry because Mr. Sheffield is a big time Broadway producer. So there's a lot of jokes about how a lot of the men in the industry are gay, and Miss Babcock has dated all the straight men in New York, kind of thing, or all the straight men in the industry, which aren't very many. There's mentions of Fran's transgender aunt. She never really makes a cameo on the show, but she's always mentioned. So she's like within the nanny lore. Miss Babcock is a more masculine character because she is a businesswoman. She is always looking for investors for the next like musical that Mr. Sheffield wants to produce. She's like very cold. She's not good with children. So very much like the opposite of what we consider feminine, um, which Niles loves to poke fun at her for. And then there's some very obvious examples in the show. Miss Babcock and Fran Fine kiss after Mr. Sheffield wins a Tony. So Mr. Sheffield goes up to accept his award, and Miss Babcock says, hey, this is my award too. So then Fran goes to kiss her, and it's like this whole thing. So then Fran's culture shock in the Sheffield home and feeling like a fish out of water in the Sheffield home is very comparable to queer people who live in a heteronormative society. But uh, unlike real life, Fran Fine, instead of changing and becoming into this like very elite socialite in Manhattan, she changes the Sheffield family around her, and they become like they make jokes about how they're gonna put plastic on the sofa, and they use a lot of like Jewish expressions, and they start to develop like the Queen's accent. So instead of like rejecting who she is, she embraces it, and they become kind of like a blended family. So it's very wholesome. Um, I am so sorry if you hear a siren. I live in Hudson County, so very, very, very chaotic. This is definitely a must read, this article, What's So Queer About the Nanny, because they really, really get into like a lot of the queer subtext, and they even have a section in the article where it talks about Miss Babcock and Miss Fine and their like enemies almost to lovers relationship. It's very, very interesting, and I probably would not have caught it or interpreted that way if I hadn't read this article. So definitely, it's definitely worth a read. I'm going to include all the links to everything, hopefully in the caption of this video. So yeah, so let's like learn a little bit about Fran Drescher, shall we? So she has a quote. She was talking to Out magazine, I believe. She says, "It just made sense that the show would have been embraced by the gay community because it was us creating it and we have that sensibility." So here's why I mentioned Fran's ex-husband. Fran's ex-husband and co-creator of The Nanny is an openly gay man. And even though he came out as gay, they very much consider themselves soulmates. So wherever Fran Drescher is, Peter Mark Jacobson is right behind her. They went on to write a sitcom about the divorce called Happily Divorced in 2011. So here are just some discussion questions for you. What is the significance of a queer-coded show reaching such popularity on network TV? And what does this say about queer representation in mainstream media? Is representation more important on screen, off screen, or both? Why is that? Do you consider Fran Drescher's work appropriation or appreciation of queer culture? What is the difference between the two? So I'm just going to briefly give like my thoughts on it. I think the fact that this show reached such popularity just really kind of debunks everything that people say about queer media. I think people think that it's very like it's going to corrupt your children, it's going to mess them up, but this is one of the most popular sitcoms, I would say, of the time period. And so many people watched this show, and so many people like found so much joy in this show. Like even my parents, who weren't in the States at this time, they were in the Dominican Republic, they remember watching The Nanny, and they remember it as this very funny, wholesome family show, even though it is very queer coded. So it kind of just debunks this whole myth that queer media is over sexual or not appropriate for children, not appropriate for family. I mean, this was very much a family sitcom and very much popular. I grew up watching it, and I'm fine for the most part. So, yeah, basically there is my thoughts on The Nanny, and I will leave the rest to you. And let's move on to The Sopranos or Sopranos, I don't know. So The Sopranos ran from 1997 to 2007, with 6 seasons on HBO. It's basically about a crime family, and it centers around the story of Tony Soprano, who is the head of the mafia, and he's like a very tough guy. He's in charge. He calls the shots, but he also has mommy issues. He goes to therapy. He's a dad. He's trying to figure out his own relationship with his parents and make sense of that so that he can be a better dad. So that's just a very interesting kind of storyline. It was created by David Chase, who does say that his own relationship with his mother inspired him to write this show. It was shot in New Jersey and in New York. A lot of the exteriors were shot around Ex, oh, sorry, Essex County, so Montclair, Bloomfield, places like that. And then the interiors were shot at Silver Cup Studios in Queens, I believe, or in the city, New York City. It is a very critically acclaimed show, won a ton of Emmys, and it is considered to be prestige TV. So if you're not familiar with the term prestige TV, think of it as like, so there's this concept that TV is a wasteland, right? You go to TV and it's like brain rot, it's reality TV, it's game shows, it's like cop shows, not very stimulating for the mind, right? Prestige TV is supposed to be stimulated or more sophisticated television, right? It's shot cinematically and on location like a movie would. It's very artistic and stylized. So there's very specific decisions about lighting, about editing, about color grading, things like that. And it touches upon more complex issues. So, where does The Sopranos fall under this? It is definitely prestige TV. And because it is based on Freudian psychology, Dr. Melfi, Tony Soprano's therapist, loves Sigmund Freud. There's a lot of complex characters, starting with Tony Soprano. He's considered a anti-hero, and there's a lot of references to European art, film, and literature. Obviously, Italy plays a very big role in the show, and it is shot where the story is set, which is New Jersey. So I'm just gonna go over some like smaller examples of queerness in the Sopranos. Carmela is friends with a gay priest. Carmela in the first season, she's trying to cope with being a mafia wife by going to church, praying, becoming very close to a priest who she, in her mind, writes off as gay because there is like some tension between them, but she's, of course, she's not there for that. She's there to try to like alleviate her soul and make sure she gets into heaven. So she just writes him off as gay. Adriana's new best friend and an undercover FBI agent is accused of being a lesbian by Adriana's boyfriend, Chris Moltisanti, who is related to Tony Soprano, and he's a rising star in the mafia family. He then tries to initiate a threesome between them, which is very gross and male gazy of him. And then Uncle June, Tony Soprano's uncle, is seen as less than a man for enjoying oral sex with a woman. But a lot of people make a lot of characters on the show make fun of him and say that he's gay or he's not a man because he enjoys giving oral sex. Um, but The Sopranos' biggest queer storyline is the story of Vito Spatafore. He is one of Tony Soprano's top earners. After two of the Soprano crew find him at a gay club, he runs to a small town in Connecticut to avoid being killed, where he has a little boyfriend, and it's a very cute and wholesome storyline until he has to go back to New Jersey and go back to that mafia lifestyle. This story was born after Joe Ganascali read about a gay mobster and mentioned it to the show's writers. So Ganascali is the guy who plays Vito Spatafore, who's right here, and then behind him is his boyfriend. Um, so basically, the spark notes of this big quote is that he was reading about this mobster in Brooklyn who was openly gay. It's called Murder Machine, and he mentioned it to one of the writers, and because he thought it was a very interesting storyline. And then in season 5 and season 6, the writers made that one of the main storylines in The Sopranos, which changed his life as an actor because this was a very controversial decision, and a lot of people were talking about it, which meant that a lot of eyes were on him as an actor. So here is the scene. Oh, yeah, here is the scene where the Soprano crew finds out that Vito is gay. Trigger warning, there is the F slur, there is vulgar language, and there is nudity because they are at a strip club called the Bada Bing, which actually exists, but I'm not gonna invite you to go because a lot of you are freshmen. So just like take a picture outside or something, but it's here in New Jersey. That's all I'm gonna say. So yeah, basically the two of the Soprano crew come in running into the bar part of the strip club saying, "Oh my God, we found Vito at this gay club. We were doing business. We were collecting money from the bartender, and we see him dressed up as one of the village people." If you don't know who the village people are, they're the people that sing YMCA, which is a very queer song. Um, so yeah, um, I'm gonna leave the links to everything, and you should watch this. Um, so yeah, what stereotypes or myths are mentioned in the conversation? Why is it problematic for the characters to say these things? Because the characters are very split about this. Half of them believe right away that he is gay and they resort to saying slurs and very problematic things, and half of them do not believe the rumor because he is a married man and has children. So why is it problematic to think that a married man with children can't be gay? Or why is it problematic to assume that he is and then, say awful things about that? Tony Soprano is kind of in the middle. He's kind of saying, guys, let's stop talking about it. We don't have proof. Let's just like keep it under the radar until we know for sure. So why do you think Tony Soprano is dismissing his crew? Is he supporting Vito? What are your thoughts on that? So here in this next scene, again, trigger warning, there are multiple slurs being said. He says the F slur and the D slur. Um, he is talking to Dr. Melfi about this. He's kind of describing, oh my goodness, he's my top earner. What am I gonna do? There are people in my crew that want to kill him. What's going on? And he starts to say, I'm a very devout Catholic. I believe in God. And then he says, if I accept homosexuality, where is the line? Which is a very common belief that if we accept homosexuality, we'll accept bestiality or things like that, which is very much not true. There are lines, but Tony Soprano, believes that there isn't, and he's like very much panicking and screaming and crying, throwing up to Dr. Melfi about this. And that's and then towards the end, he just kind of says, you know what, God bless them. I salute, fuck it, right? Because he's over this whole situation and he just wants Vito to come back because he is his top earner. So just a little bit of discussion for you. Do Tony's concerns about homosexuality sound familiar? Are they not valid, or and why or why not? Why do you think Tony is more concerned about gay men than lesbian women? Because he does bring that up. Why is Tony so insecure having this conversation with Dr. Melfi? And why do you think Tony has a sudden change of heart in the end? So my thoughts on this is that Tony's not necessarily saying gay rights, he's not with the community, but I think while he does struggle with his own thoughts about homosexuality, I think he just, at the end of the day, he doesn't care about that, right? He has his own personal life. Everyone has their personal life. He's just trying to make money. Let's be real. He's trying to make money. He's trying to keep his wealth. He's got a mansion in Essex County to pay. So he does not care less about what happens or what doesn't happen to Vito. He just wants his money. Um, so while you may say, Chelsea, what the hell, then Any and The Sopranos are two very different shows, there are ways that we can connect these two. So I'm just going to start off by asking you, which TV show has the better uh, representation of queer people in your opinion? And I am going to leave that to you. Why do you think the representation is so different despite both shows existing in the same time period? My opinion is that you cannot separate the art from the artist, and definitely the identities of these two people, of the co-creators, of the creators of the show, do matter into how the show presents queer people. Like, for example, Fran Drescher is an ally to the community. She's very involved with the community. She understands the community. She takes her time to celebrate it. Meanwhile, David Chase is a straight man who grew up watching like the classic mafia stuff, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, all this very over the top violent stuff. So obviously he's gonna prioritize that stuff and talking about like kind of like the horrors of the mafia um life and not necessarily really making a statement in his work. So I think it does matter. You cannot separate the art from the artist, but you may have a different opinion than me. So I'm looking forward to hearing it. Do you think the locations and where the show's queer coded characters live matter? Why or why not? I do think this matters. And I think, again, there is a need for intersectionality when we talk about the community, because I think when we bring up the community today, I think we often bring up people who live in blue states or people who live in cities where, stereotypically speaking, cities have always been like a safe haven for someone to be queer because cities are always seen more as progressive and modern and fast paced and overall better than country or smaller towns in the United States, like or red states. But I think it's important to acknowledge that queer people in red states do exist. Queer people in small towns do exist. Like Vito finds freedom in his identity in a small town. So I think it really does matter. And I do commend David Chase for doing this because it does disrupt our thinking about where queer people get to exist and where they don't get to exist. So those are my thoughts, and that is my presentation. I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts soon.